She rolled into his garage in a wheelchair and a designer suit, offering him $45,000 to pretend to be her boyfriend for a single weekend. He had grease under his fingernails, a 7-year-old daughter at home, and exactly $214 in his checking account. He should have said no. He almost did. But then she looked at him, not like a CEO looks at a contractor, but like a woman who had run completely out of options. And something in his chest shifted. He said yes. Neither of them knew what they were walking into. If this story pulls you in, hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The compressor on Bay 2 had been leaking for 3 weeks. Ethan Cole knew it the way he knew everything wrong with his shop. Not because he'd found time to fix it, but because it announced itself every morning when he unlocked the front bay doors and the hiss of escaping air greeted him like a reminder of everything he hadn't gotten to yet. The list was long. The compressor, the bad fluorescent tube above the alignment rack that flickered every time a truck heavier than a half-ton pulled in, the crack in the parking lot asphalt that kept widening every winter and had now split far enough that he'd started warning customers to walk around the left side when they came in on foot. He'd been meaning to fix all of it for about 2 years. That Tuesday morning in late September, Ethan was under a 2009 Chevy Silverado with a bad starter and a customer who'd already called twice asking when it would be ready. The shop smelled like oil and rust and the faint chemical edge of brake cleaner, which was just the smell of the place. Had always been the smell of the place, going back to when his father ran it, and Ethan spent summers sweeping the floor and handing over tools he didn't know the names of yet. Cole's Auto and Repair. Established 1987. The sign out front still said that, though the paint had faded badly and one corner of it had been nicked by a snowplow back in February 2021 and bent at a slight angle Ethan kept meaning to straighten. He was 32 years old, and he was tired in a way that sleep didn't quite fix. "Dad!" He heard it from under the truck, small voice, patient, the particular tone his daughter used when she'd already said something once and was giving him a reasonable amount of time to respond before trying again. He slid out from under the Silverado on the creeper, blinking in the weak morning light. Lily was standing at the edge of the bay in her school clothes, backpack on, lunch bag hanging from one hand. She was 7, with her mother's dark eyes and a gap in her front teeth she'd been working on losing for months. She was watching him with the calm, slightly evaluating expression she'd developed sometime around age 5 and never entirely dropped, like she was constantly running a quiet internal assessment of whether the adults around her were handling things adequately. "Bus comes at 7:42, she said. Ethan looked at his watch. It was 7:38. Right. He sat up, grabbed the rag from his back pocket, started wiping his hands. "You eat? Cereal. Which one?" "The good one." "We're almost out of the good one." "I know, I only had a little." He stood up, pulled her in with one arm for a quick hug that probably left a faint grease mark on her backpack. It always did, no matter how thoroughly he cleaned up, and walked her to the edge of the lot where the bus stopped. She didn't need him to walk her. She'd told him this herself, firmly, about 6 months ago. But he still came to the edge of the lot and watched, and she didn't object to that, so it had become the compromise they'd quietly agreed on. The bus came. She got on without looking back. That was fine. He watched until it turned the corner. He went back under the Silverado. By 11:30, he had the starter replaced, the Silverado done, and a 2014 Honda Accord with a mysterious electrical fault pulled into Bay 1. Marcus Webb, his only full-time employee, was running diagnostics on a Ford Focus in Bay 3 and eating a gas station sandwich at the same time, which Ethan had given up telling him not to do around equipment. Marcus was 26, built like he should have played offensive line in college, and possessed of an extremely specific mechanical intuition that Ethan valued enough to overlook the sandwich thing, and also the fact that Marcus was constitutionally incapable of arriving before 9 a.m., regardless of what time his shift was supposed to start. "Accord's throwing a code for the body control module," Marcus said without looking up from his diagnostic tablet. Could be the module itself, could be a wiring issue, could be somebody put an aftermarket stereo in at some point and did it badly. Probably the stereo. Probably. The Honda's owner was a woman in her 60s named Pat Burrell, who'd brought it in twice before, and always brought a small tin of homemade cookies when she did, which was sitting on Ethan's workbench right now. He made a mental note to look at the Accord before the end of the day. Pat was the kind of customer he couldn't afford to lose. Reliable, prompt with payment, referred other people. He was looking at the Accord's fuse box when he heard the car pull into the lot. Not a local car. He could tell by the sound of it. The engine had a particular refined quiet that domestic vehicles in this price range didn't have, and when he glanced toward the lot, he saw a black Mercedes S-Class, current generation, the kind of car that cost more than he'd made in the last 4 years combined. It sat in the parking lot for a moment before the driver's side door opened and a woman in a dark blazer got out and came around to the passenger side. A wheelchair came out next, sleek, lightweight carbon fiber frame, not the kind you saw in hospitals. Then the woman in the passenger seat transferred into it with practiced efficiency, the motion fluid and unhesitating, and she came around the front of the car toward the shop entrance. She was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back, charcoal blazer over a silk blouse. She moved the chair with one hand, the other holding a phone she was in the process of putting away. Her posture was, Ethan had no better word for it, deliberate. The kind of posture that takes constant effort to maintain, or has been maintained so long it just became the default. She stopped at the shop entrance and looked at Ethan with the expression of a person who had spent considerable time deciding to be here, and wasn't going to be put off by anything minor, like the fact that he was in the middle of something. Ethan Cole? Yeah. I need to speak with you privately. She said it the way someone says something they've already decided you're going to agree to. Not rude, exactly, just very clear about what was going to happen next. Ethan looked at her for a second. He looked at the car. He looked at the woman who'd driven it, who had stepped back and was standing near the front fender with the particular neutrality of someone paid to be invisible. I'm in the middle of a diagnostic, he said. I'll wait. He almost said something. He didn't, though, because something about the way she said it, not impatiently but with a quiet, unmistakable exhaustion, made him decide not to. He finished the initial diagnostic on the Accord, told Marcus to start pulling panels looking for amateur wiring, and walked to his office, which was a small, cluttered room off the side of Bay 1 that held a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet that no longer properly closed, and a coffee maker that was approximately as old as his marriage had been. She was already in there. She'd positioned her wheelchair near the desk, not in front of it across from his chair, but sort of beside it, at an angle. Not submissive, not commanding. Like she'd made a quick calculation about the geometry of the room and chosen the position that gave her the most options. He pulled his chair out and sat in it without going around to the other side. Something about the room felt too small for that kind of formality. I'm Sophia Bennett, she said. He knew the name the way people in this part of Ohio vaguely knew the names of large regional corporations, not with any specific knowledge, just as ambient background noise. Bennett Group. Something to do with logistics and supply chain. Big enough to have an airport presence in Columbus, he thought, or maybe Cleveland. He honestly wasn't sure. Okay, he said. I need a favor. She paused. I prefer to be direct, so I'll tell you plainly what I'm offering and what I need, and you can decide. I appreciate direct. She looked at him for a moment, and he had the odd sense she was recalibrating something, like she'd prepared for a different kind of response. I need someone to accompany me to my family's estate this weekend as my partner, she said. We would arrive Friday evening and leave Sunday afternoon. You would be introduced as my boyfriend of approximately 4 months. There are dinners and events. You'd be expected to stay in the main house, be present at meals, and behave as though we have a genuine relationship. A brief pause. I'm offering $45,000. The coffee maker made a small burbling noise in the corner. Ethan looked at her. She looked back at him, completely still, waiting. That's a lot of money for a weekend, he said. Yes. Why me? Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. Because you don't have anything to do with my world. No connections to my industry, no relationship with anyone in my family, no financial entanglement with anyone who might try to leverage you. I did research. You're exactly who you appear to be. A broke mechanic. I was going to say a man with a clear record and no competing interests. A short pause. But yes, also that. He almost smiled, didn't quite. What is this actually about? He said. What's happening at this estate that you need a fake boyfriend for? For the first time since she'd sat down, she looked away. Just briefly, just toward the window with its view of the parking lot and the bent sign. When she looked back, her expression hadn't changed, but something underneath it had. "My uncle is trying to force me into a marriage arrangement with one of the company's executives," she said. "He believes it's the cleanest way to consolidate control of the company before the board election in November. If I arrive at this weekend's gathering without a partner and without any evidence of a life outside the company, his case becomes stronger." A pause. "I need to demonstrate that I have personal relationships he can't easily manipulate, that I'm not isolated, that there are people in my life who aren't beholden to him." Ethan turned that over in his head for a moment. "And after the weekend?" "We part ways. You have no further obligation to me. I have no further obligation to you." 45,000. 45,000. "I can have 15 transferred to whatever account you specify before we leave Friday, the remainder when we return Sunday." He looked at the desk surface for a moment. There was a water stain on it in the shape of something vaguely like a boot. He'd been looking at it for 3 years and had never been able to figure out how it got there. $45,000. He did the math the same way he always did the math now, which was not in abstract terms but in specific and pressing ones. The back property tax on the shop, which had been hanging over him since a lean year in 2022. The roof repair that the insurance company had told him 3 times they weren't going to cover. The money he'd put aside, was trying to put aside, for Lily's school, not college. Just the decent elementary school across town that had better teachers and a smaller class ratio than the one she was zoned for. The transmission on his truck that was developing a hesitation he recognized and hadn't yet decided how to feel about. $45,000. "I have a daughter," he said, 7 years old. "I can't leave her for a weekend without arranging care." "I understand that. My neighbor watches her sometimes, but she's not. I'd need to make sure she's comfortable with the whole weekend. I can compensate you for any childcare costs separately." He looked at Sophia Bennett. She was watching him with an expression that had moved into something a little less contained, not desperate, not pleading, more like someone who had been holding something very still for a very long time and was running out of the particular kind of energy that took. "Are you safe?" he said. "I mean, is this something where you're in actual danger?" She blinked. It was the first unguarded thing she'd done since she walked in. "From the weekend?" she said. "From any of it." She was quiet for a moment. "Not physically, no." "But?" "My uncle has been managing my company's affairs since my father became ill 2 years ago. He's made himself indispensable in ways that are very difficult to reverse without a public fight. The marriage arrangement is his way of making it permanent." A pause. "So, not danger in the way you probably mean, but yes, in a real sense." Ethan nodded slowly. "Can I have until this evening to decide?" "Yes." "I need a number I can reach you at." She took a business card from the inside pocket of her blazer and set it on the desk. He picked it up. Plain white card, just her name and a phone number. No title, no company logo. "One more thing," he said. "Why not someone from your own city? You have lawyers, employees, someone you already trust. Everyone I know in that world has an existing relationship with my company or my uncle," she said. "I can't use anyone from that environment. They'd be looking for leverage immediately." She paused again. "You're 40 miles outside of Columbus on a state route. I've had 3 cars into this shop over the past 2 years through a third-party fleet account. You've never overcharged, never suggested unnecessary work, never tried to upsell on parts that didn't need replacing. I asked people about you." He looked at her. "You asked people about me?" "I'm a CEO," she said, with the faint edge of someone who has decided that one particular kind of reaction is not worth having. "I do due diligence. Much." He called Sandra Okafor at 4 p.m., which was when she usually got home from her nursing shift and was still in the car and willing to talk. Sandra lived 2 doors down, was 58, had been widowed for 11 years, and had appointed herself, without any discussion and through a process Ethan still didn't entirely understand, as the primary auxiliary caregiver in Lily's life. She brought food over after bad weeks. She picked Lily up from school on the days Ethan was stuck on a job. She had opinions about Lily's reading level and about Ethan's diet and about the crack in the parking lot asphalt, and she expressed all of them without being asked. "This weekend?" Sandra said when he explained in vague and incomplete terms that he had something he needed to do. "Friday to Sunday." "What something?" Work thing. Work thing that involves leaving town. Yeah. A pause. You sound weird. It's something that came up. Good opportunity. I just need to know she'd be comfortable. She's always comfortable with me. I know. She can have the pull-out couch. She likes the pull-out couch. I know she does. Ethan. Sandra's voice shifted. Is everything okay? Yes, he said. Yeah, everything's fine. He heard her deciding not to push it. Go do your work thing, she said. Lily will be fine. He told Lily at dinner. He made pasta, the box kind with the powdered cheese that she liked better than the real thing, which he had given up feeling embarrassed about, and sat across from her at the kitchen table that was slightly too big for two people and had been that way for 5 years, and told her he was going to be away for the weekend and that she'd be staying with Sandra. Lily ate a forkful of pasta. Considered this. Why? She said. Work trip. You don't go on work trips. I do sometimes. She looked at him with the quiet assessment expression. Did something happen? No, he said. Something came up. A good thing. What kind of good thing? The kind that could help us out. She seemed to process this. She ate another forkful of pasta. Sandra lets me watch movies past 9 on Friday. I know she does. So that's okay. That's between you and Sandra. She almost smiled. So you're not going to say no to it. I'm not going to weigh in on it from a distance. She went back to eating, satisfied. After a minute, she said, Is it dangerous? No, he said. It's a family thing. Not dangerous. She looked up. Whose family? Not ours, someone else's. She thought about this for a moment, then apparently decided it was sufficient. They did the dishes together after dinner, which was their routine. Lily washed, Ethan dried and put away, and Lily talked about school in a loose and associative way that he'd learned not to try to organize into any particular narrative. She described a conflict over a tetherball court, a math worksheet she'd gotten full marks on without studying, a girl named Priya who had brought a water bottle shaped like a cactus and was now the most discussed person in 2nd grade. He listened. He dried plates. He put them away in the cabinet above the stove, the one with the door that didn't quite close properly. After Lily was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with Sophia Bennett's business card and his phone, and he thought about it for a while. Then he called the number. She answered on the 2nd ring. I'll do it, he said. The rest of the week moved in the strange double time that happens when something coming is significant enough to sit on the edge of your awareness without being addressable yet. He worked. He fixed the Accord's wiring issue, which turned out to be exactly as stupid as Marcus had predicted. Someone had spliced into the factory harness for an aftermarket stereo and done it with wire nuts, which was the automotive equivalent of patching a gas line with duct tape. He replaced a water pump on a Jeep Cherokee, rotated tires on 4 separate vehicles, ordered parts for 2 jobs scheduled the following week, had a long and slightly tense conversation with his supplier about a delayed shipment of brake components. Wednesday evening, a woman arrived at the shop, not Sophia, but the woman who had driven the Mercedes, who introduced herself as Claire, and who brought a garment bag and a brief professionally impersonal explanation that Ms. Bennett had arranged appropriate attire for the weekend. Ethan looked at the garment bag. She bought me clothes, he said. She had them prepared, Claire said, which was a distinction he decided not to interrogate. Inside the garment bag, 2 dress shirts, one white and one a deep blue, both well-made and correctly sized. How she knew his size, he didn't ask. A pair of dark charcoal trousers, a sports coat in a shade of navy that was almost black, a tie, which he looked at for a moment and then set aside as aspirational. 2 pairs of dress shoes, both in his size, one black Oxford and one a dark brown. He stood in his bedroom looking at the clothes laid out on the bed, which was still on his side of what had been a shared bed, and now wasn't shared but still felt, sometimes, like it was supposed to be. He thought about calling the whole thing off. He did not call it off. Thursday night he packed a bag, which felt surreal. He hadn't packed a bag for anything that wasn't a fishing trip in at least 2 years. He folded the dress shirts carefully. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, which he generally tried not to make a habit of. He had the kind of face that was more functional than remarkable. Wide jaw, decent bone structure, dark circles under his eyes that had more to do with sleep debt than genetics, a scar through one eyebrow from a car hood incident at 17 that his father had found funnier than was entirely appropriate. Lily came in while he was looking at himself. "You look worried," she said. "I'm not worried. You look like when the rent's due." He turned away from the mirror. "The rent is not due. Everything is fine." She looked at the packed bag on the floor, then at the garment bag hanging on the closet door. "Fancy clothes," she said. "Just for the trip. Did someone buy those for you?" He paused. "Yes." She looked at him again with the quiet assessment, and then something in her face shifted to something softer, and she said, in a tone that was somehow both entirely casual and completely deliberate, "I hope it goes okay, Dad." He looked at his daughter for a moment. "Me too, Bug," he said. Friday afternoon, the Mercedes came back. It was 2 p.m. Ethan had handed the shop to Marcus for the day, explained that Marcus was in charge until Monday, and endured Marcus's extended and only partially concealed curiosity about where Ethan was going in a sports coat on a Friday. "Just a thing," Ethan said. "What kind of thing?" "A weekend thing." "You're wearing the coat." "It's a coat. People wear coats." "Ethan, man, you haven't worn anything with a collar in it. See you Monday." He put his bag in the trunk of the Mercedes. He got in the back seat. Claire, apparently, was his driver as well as Sophia's, and she made no particular acknowledgement of the strangeness of the situation, which he appreciated. Sophia was already in the car. She'd transferred to the back seat, her chair folded in the trunk beside Ethan's bag. She was wearing a burgundy jacket over a cream blouse, her hair down instead of pulled back, and she was looking at her phone with the focused, slightly tense expression of someone dealing with something that wasn't going the way they'd planned. She looked up when he got in. "You came," she said. "Said I would." She nodded and went back to her phone for a moment, then seemed to make a deliberate decision to put it away. The silence in the car, as Claire pulled out of the lot and onto the state route heading east, was not comfortable exactly. But it wasn't hostile either. It had the quality of two people who don't know each other being temporarily enclosed together and not quite knowing what to do with that. After about 10 minutes, Sophia said, "There are some things you need to know before we arrive." "Yeah, I figured." She turned slightly toward him. "My father, Richard Bennett, founded the company in 1991. He had a stroke 26 months ago. He's partially recovered, but he doesn't have the capacity to run things anymore. And he doesn't have the clarity to navigate family politics the way he used to. He lives in the east wing of the estate with a care team." "Does he know about this? The arrangement your uncle is pushing?" "He knows some version of it. My uncle has been managing what my father hears." A pause. "That's one of the things I'm dealing with." "Okay." "My uncle is Martin Bennett, 15 years older than my father. He was always peripheral to the company. Never an operator, never involved in day-to-day decisions. But when my father got sick, he stepped in during the acute period and made himself very useful, very fast." She said it without particular inflection, but something underneath the words had weight. "He's not stupid. He's very good at reading what people need and providing it in ways that create obligation." Ethan watched the Ohio countryside past the window, rolling fields, the odd farmhouse, trees going yellow and rust at the edges. "The executive," he said. "The one he wants you to marry." "Derek Harmon. He runs our Northeast distribution division. He's competent. He's also been Martin's closest ally in the company for 3 years. The marriage would essentially give Martin a permanent foothold in the company's leadership, regardless of how the board votes in November." "You've made it clear you don't want this?" "Repeatedly." "And?" "And I'm told I'm being emotional, that I'm not seeing the strategic picture, that the arrangement protects the company's interests and the family's interests, and that at some point I'll recognize that." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, her jaw set in the particular way of someone who has been told something infuriating so many times, it has stopped producing rage and started producing something quieter and harder. "How long has this been going on?" he said. "The marriage campaign specifically?" 8 months. A brief pause. "My father's illness and Martin's increased involvement?" 2 years. "And the board election?" November 14th. "If I can demonstrate to the board that I have the company's operations under control, and that I have, as they put it, stable personal circumstances, Martin's case for expanded authority falls apart." He's been using the framing that I'm too focused, too singular, too risky as an executive in terms of succession planning. She paused. Which is a polite way of saying, unmarried, no family, no one who would push back if something happened to me. Whereas if you show up with someone, it doesn't solve everything, but it removes one of the cleaner narratives he's been working with. She looked at him. You understand I'm not telling you this weekend fixes my problems. I didn't think it did. I just need to walk into that estate without walking in alone. He thought about that for a moment. Tell me about the people I'll meet, he said. She exhaled slowly. Not quite a sigh, more like a controlled release of pressure. Martin, obviously. His wife Carolyn, who is pleasant and largely absent from everything that matters. Derek Harmon will be there. Martin invited him, which tells you everything about how Martin views this weekend. There are two cousins, James and Will, who are harmless and mostly interested in not being caught in the middle of anything. There's a woman named Patricia Ashe, who is the family's attorney and has been for 30 years and whose loyalties I genuinely cannot fully map. And there's my father. Another pause. If he's having a good day, he'll want to meet you. And if he's not, then you won't see him. He turned that over. What does he know? About me? That we've been seeing each other for 4 months. That you're a businessman. I said small business, which is true. That you're from outside of Columbus. That I'm happy. She said the last word without inflection. He couldn't tell if that was discomfort or just efficiency. Okay, he said. We met through mutual contacts at an industry event. You're interested in expanding your business. We got along and started spending time together. How do we act with each other? She was quiet for a moment. Comfortable. We don't need to perform anything excessive, just comfortable, like people who know each other and are easy with each other. Okay. You can call me Sophia. I'll call you Ethan. That's fine. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was something slightly absurd about the entire conversation, and he thought he saw the edge of something in her face that acknowledged the absurdity, a flicker, quickly controlled, of something that in different circumstances might have been the beginning of a laugh. I know this is strange, she said. Little bit. Thank you for She stopped. Started again. I don't have a lot of options right now. I understand. She looked back out the window. The estate is about 90 minutes. There's water in the side pocket if you want it. He found the water bottle. He opened it. He looked out the window at Ohio going by. 90 minutes to whatever was waiting on the other end. He thought about the shop, about the compressor still leaking, about Lily on Sandra's pull-out couch watching movies past 9, about the bills arranged in the folder in the filing cabinet, which he'd looked at that morning and tried not to think about since. $45,000. But sitting in this car, in this borrowed coat, next to this woman with her complicated family and her careful way of holding herself, he had the growing, slightly uncomfortable sense that the money had stopped being the main thing about this several hours ago. He just wasn't sure yet what had replaced it. The Bennett estate appeared first as a gate. Black iron, maybe 12 feet high, set into a stone wall that disappeared into the tree line on both sides. A security camera mounted on each pillar. Claire slowed the Mercedes to a stop and the gate swung open without anyone pressing anything, which meant someone had been watching for them. The driveway was long enough that the main house wasn't visible from the gate. Ethan watched it through the windshield as it gradually revealed itself around a gentle curve. A federal-style manor, 3 stories, pale stone facade. The kind of house that had been built to communicate permanence. The grounds around it were immaculate in the careful, expensive way that required constant maintenance to look effortless. Mature oaks along the drive. A fountain that was still running despite the September chill. Hedges trimmed to a geometry that no one achieves by accident. How long has your family owned this? Ethan asked. My grandfather bought the land in 1963, Sophia said. My father built the main house in 1994, when the company started doing well. It's a lot of house. Yes, she said, with a flatness that suggested she'd had a complicated relationship with the house for most of her life. A man in a dark jacket came down the front steps as the car stopped. Not a butler exactly, more like someone whose job description covered several things and didn't have a clean title. He opened Sophia's door first, retrieved her chair from the trunk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it before, and stepped back while she transferred into it. Ethan got out on his side and stood for a moment, taking in the scale of the place. The facade had tall windows that caught the late afternoon light. There were flower boxes along the second floor sills that had been recently replanted with something dark red for autumn. Whoever managed the grounds cared about the details. Sophia moved alongside him on the gravel drive. "Stay close to me when we go in," she said quietly. "Martin will be watching how you carry yourself." "What does he want to see?" "Someone he can figure out quickly." A pause. "Don't give him that." They went in through the front door. The entrance hall was high-ceilinged, with a staircase that curved up to the left and a corridor going straight back into the house. The floors were stone, covered partway by a long runner in muted colors. There were framed photographs along one wall, family portraits going back several decades. And Ethan caught a glimpse of a younger, healthier version of a man who looked like Sophia's father before Sophia had taken a slight left turn, and he followed her into what appeared to be a sitting room. Martin Bennett was standing near the fireplace. He was around 65, well-maintained in the way wealthy men sometimes were. Not soft, but not hard either. Silver-haired, wide through the shoulders. He wore a collared shirt open at the neck and dark trousers, the studied casualness of a man who wanted you to know he wasn't trying to impress you. He had a drink in his hand, and he held it the way people hold drinks when they're actually thinking about something else. He looked at Ethan, the way a man looks at something he's already forming an opinion about and is checking whether the opinion holds. "Sophia," he said. He moved toward her and bent slightly to touch her shoulder, the kind of physical greeting that has warmth in its shape and none in its substance. Then he straightened and looked at Ethan. "And this must be Ethan." "Martin," Sophia said. "Ethan Cole." Martin extended his hand. His grip was firm and about 3 seconds too long, the handshake of a man testing for something. "Good drive?" Martin asked. "Not bad," Ethan said. "You're from outside Columbus." "About 40 miles west." "What kind of business?" "Auto repair. I own the shop." Martin nodded slowly, as if Ethan had confirmed something. "Good work, that. Hands-on. You can always tell something about a man from how he feels about working with his hands." It was the kind of compliment that was also an assessment of social position, and it landed exactly the way Martin intended it to. Ethan filed it and kept his face neutral. A woman appeared from the hallway. Slight, carefully dressed, early 60s, with the kind of face that had probably been beautiful in a conventional way 30 years ago, and had since settled into something more precise. "Carolyn," Sophia said. "Darling, you made it." Carolyn came forward and kissed Sophia on the cheek with the slightly theatrical warmth of a woman who had learned that warmth was useful. She turned to Ethan, and her expression shifted into something appraising and pleasant at the same time. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." "Likewise," Ethan said. "Sophia's been very private about—" Carolyn laughed softly. "Well, about everything, frankly. She always has been." "That's kind of you to say," Sophia said, in a tone that didn't mean it was kind at all. Martin led them toward the back of the house, through a formal dining room that clearly wasn't being used this evening, into a smaller sitting room where 3 other people were already gathered. James and Will Bennett, the 2 cousins Sophia had mentioned, were in their mid-30s, both in the kind of relaxed weekend clothes that still cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. They were on a sofa together, and they both stood when Sophia entered, which surprised Ethan slightly until he understood it was habit rather than affection. They were polite. James shook Ethan's hand, said something pleasant about the drive, made a joke that didn't quite land. Will was quieter, watchful in a way that felt different from Martin's watchfulness. Less predatory, more uncertain. And then there was Derek Harmon. He was standing slightly apart from the cousins, near the windows, with a glass of wine, and the particular posture of a man who has been positioned in a room and knows it. Late 30s, good-looking in a deliberate way, the kind of build that came from gym hours that were also partially professional investment. His suit was too well pressed for a casual weekend arrival, and Ethan noticed that he'd positioned himself so that he was the first person in Ethan's sightline when coming through the doorway. He crossed the room to them with the smooth, unhurried speed of someone accustomed to being the focal point of any introduction. "Derek Harmon," he said, and his eyes moved to Ethan with the specific quality of a man trying to determine a threat level. "Ethan Cole." They shook hands. Derek's grip was the same as Martin's, a fraction too long, a fraction too firm, like they'd compared notes. "Sophia talks about you," Derek said. "Does she?" Ethan said. A brief beat. Derek smiled. It was a good smile, practiced and smooth. All good things, he said, which was probably meant to land as magnanimous and instead landed as something else entirely. Sophia had already moved past Derek toward the window, and Ethan followed her without making a production of it, which he suspected was the right move. Behind him, he felt Derek recalibrate. "You okay?" Ethan said quietly, near the window. "Fine." She was looking at the darkening garden. "That went fine." "Harmon's here as what, exactly? Your uncle just invited his preferred son-in-law to the family weekend?" She exhaled slowly through her nose. "He was already in town on company business, and Martin thought it made sense for him to join for dinner." She turned her head slightly toward Ethan. "Which is exactly what I expected. He looks like he practiced that walk across the room." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "Almost nothing." "He did. He does everything like that." Dinner that night was what Ethan would later think of as the opening formalities. The dining room, when they used it for the evening meal, was large enough that the sound of silverware was audible between conversations. The table could seat 12, and there were 7 of them, which meant the empty chairs had a presence of their own. Sophia's father, Richard, had not appeared for dinner. "A tired day," Carolyn said, and the subject was changed. Ethan sat beside Sophia. Across from them were Derek and James. Martin sat at the head of the table with the focused attention of a man running the meeting he'd arranged, which was what this was. The conversation in the first part of the meal was careful and lateral, the kind of dinner talk that is actually reconnaissance. Martin asked about Ethan's shop in the deliberate, pleasant way of someone who has already decided what the answers mean. How long had he owned it? Had his family always been in the area? Was the business growing? Ethan answered honestly, which was partly strategy and partly because he didn't have a prepared alternative ready. The shop had been his father's. He'd taken it over at 24 when his father's health started declining. Business was stable. Not growing fast, but stable. "Tough market," Martin said, nodding. "Small, independent operators." "There's always work," Ethan said. "People need their cars fixed." "Of course," Martin smiled. "But the margins must be challenging." "They're fine. I imagine a place that size, you're mostly reliant on repeat business, community relationships." "Mostly, yeah." "That's admirable," Martin said, and somehow managed to make admirable sound like the word you'd use for something you'd never actually want. Derek, across the table, had been quiet through this exchange, and Ethan noticed he was watching Sophia more than he was watching Ethan. There was a particular quality to Derek's attention. Not quite longing, not quite ownership. Something that occupied the uncomfortable space between them. "Sophia," Derek said during a pause in the main conversation, "I had a chance to look at the Midwest distribution restructure you proposed to the board last month." It was a deliberate move, pulling work into the dinner, in this room, with these people, in front of Ethan, establishing a shared professional language that Ethan had no access to, reminding everyone, including Sophia, of the world they occupied together. Sophia looked at him with the calm, flat attention she seemed to deploy when she was most on guard. "Did you?" she said. "There are some interesting ideas in it. I had some thoughts on the Northeast integration piece. I'd be happy to discuss it Monday during business hours." A small beat. Derek smiled. "Of course." Martin watched this exchange with the visible satisfaction of a man observing something he'd designed working as intended. Later, after dinner, when the group had moved to the adjoining room for drinks and the conversation had loosened slightly, Will Bennett appeared beside Ethan near the bar cart with the slightly awkward directness of a man who had decided to do something and hadn't quite rehearsed it. "You're handling this well," Will said, quietly enough that it didn't carry. Ethan looked at him. Will was looking at his drink. "Martin's a lot," Will said. "And Derek is, well," he paused. "You seem steady." "I try to be." Will glanced at Sophia across the room, who was in a strained but controlled conversation with Carolyn. "She doesn't bring people around," he said. "Hasn't in a long time." A pause. "I'm not saying that to put pressure on anything, just, I noticed." "Okay," Ethan said. Will seemed to want to say something else and then decide against it. He tapped the edge of his glass with one finger. "Martin's going to push harder tomorrow," he said, "just so you know." He moved back toward the sofa before Ethan could respond. Their rooms were on the second floor, at the end of the east corridor, 2 rooms that shared a sitting room between them. The arrangement had been Carolyn's, delivered with a carefully calibrated smile, close enough to look like a couple's quarters, separated enough that no one could object. Sophia came through the connecting door about an hour after Ethan had settled in. She'd changed out of the burgundy jacket into something simpler, and her hair was down, and she looked not relaxed, that wasn't quite right. She looked like someone who had been performing in a particular register all evening and had finally put the instrument down. She sat in the chair near the window of the sitting room. Ethan was on the small sofa with his jacket off, shoes on the floor, a glass of water on the table beside him. "Will talked to you," she said. "Yeah." "What did he say?" "That Martin's going to push harder tomorrow, that you don't usually bring people around." She looked at her hands for a moment. "Will is the only person in that room I don't actively have to strategize around." "What about the cousins?" "James follows Martin's lead. He's not mean about it. He doesn't have a lot of spine when it comes to pushing back on authority." A pause. "Will has more backbone but less position. He knows where the line is." "And your father?" Her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift around the eyes, a new kind of tension. "My father had a good company," she said. "He built something real. And he loved Martin because Martin is his older brother, and he's always looked up to him, even when he probably shouldn't have." A pause. "When the stroke happened and Martin stepped in, it looked like family support. It looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like. But it wasn't. It wasn't nothing. Martin did help during the acute period. He made decisions that needed to be made, and he made them correctly." She paused. "The problem is that he never stopped. And by the time it became clear he wasn't planning to step back, he'd made himself too embedded to remove without a fight that would hurt the company." "So the board election is your fight?" "The board election is one piece of it." She shifted in the chair, the slight adjustment of someone managing persistent discomfort that she's learned to work around. "There are board members who are loyal to my father and would back me if they felt confident I was stable. There are others who are loyal to Martin because Martin has been present and I've been focused on operations rather than politics. The marriage narrative is his way of framing me as an instability risk." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What does Derek actually want? Does he want to marry you, or is he doing Martin a favor?" She thought about it. "Both," she said. "Derek is ambitious in a specific way. He wants legitimacy more than power. He already has operational power in his division. What he wants is the kind of status that comes with being connected to the founding family. Martin offers him that, and Derek offers Martin a compliant operator with a family connection." She paused. "Whether Derek has any actual feelings about any of it, I honestly couldn't tell you. He's very hard to read." "I noticed." She glanced at him. "He was watching you at dinner." "I noticed that too. He's trying to figure out if you're a real relationship or a countermove." "What's he going to conclude?" She looked at him for a moment, a genuine look, not the careful managed attention she'd deployed all evening. "I don't know," she said. The sitting room was quiet. Through the window, the estate grounds were dark, the fountain still audible faintly from this distance. "How's your back?" Ethan asked. She blinked. "What?" "You shifted twice at dinner. The chair in there wasn't right." She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between surprised and uncertain. "It was fine." "Okay." A pause. "It's been worse," she said more quietly. "The chair in the dining room has a bad support angle. It's fine. I manage it." "Do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Say you're fine when you're managing something." She was quiet for a moment. "Usually, yes." He didn't push it. After a moment, she said, "You asked me at the shop if I was safe. You were the first person who asked me that in a while." He looked at her. She was looking at the window. "People around me ask if the company is stable," she said. "They ask about the board. They ask about the legal strategy, the media strategy, the position we want to take. Nobody asks about me." A pause. "That's partly my fault. I've made myself very easy not to ask that question of." "Why?" "Because if you show people where you're soft, they use it." She said it without self-pity, just as fact. "In my family, in my industry, I learned young." Ethan turned his glass of water between his hands. Outside, something, an owl or a nightbird, made a sound in the trees. "I have a daughter," he said. "Lily, 7. She does the same thing sometimes, tries not to show when something's hard because she doesn't want to put it on me." He paused. "I'm never sure whether to be proud of it or worried about it." Sophia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was a shade different than it had been. "How long has it been just the two of you?" 5 years. Her mother, we lost her. It was fast, a lot of things happened fast. He didn't elaborate and Sophia didn't press. "What's she like?" "Quiet, watching all the time, smarter than she lets on." He paused. "She told me I looked like I did when the rent was due, the night before I came here." Something crossed Sophia's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Something warmer than anything she'd shown all evening. "She sounds perceptive," Sophia said. "It's inconvenient," Ethan said, and this time the thing in her face did make it to a smile, small and quick, like a light turning on and off before she got control of it. She stood from the chair. "I should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be—" "There's a lunch with everyone, and then an informal meeting in the afternoon that Martin will try to use as leverage. I'll tell you more in the morning." "Okay." She moved toward the connecting door to her room and then stopped, her hand on the frame. "The shoe on the left, the black Oxford, the laces on it are worn," she said. "I should have caught that. Claire will have a replacement pair in the morning." He looked down at his shoes on the floor. One lace was fraying near the eyelet. He hadn't noticed. "You really do pay attention," he said. "I always have," she said. "It's easier to pay attention to things like shoelaces than to the things I can't fix." She went through the door and pulled it mostly closed behind her, leaving a narrow bar of light from her room cutting across the sitting room floor. Ethan sat in the quiet for a while. He thought about Martin's handshake and Derek's practiced walk and Will's quiet warning and the way Sophia's face had moved when she almost smiled. He thought about Lily on Sandra's pull-out couch, probably watching something she wasn't supposed to, and about the shop and the compressor leak and the $45,000 and all the reasons he was here. The narrow bar of light from Sophia's room disappeared when she turned off the lamp. Ethan finished his water, set the glass down, and sat in the dark for a little longer than he needed to before he finally went to bed. He woke before 6. The room was unfamiliar in the particular disorienting way of places you haven't slept in before. The wrong quality of light through the curtains, the wrong ambient sound, the ceiling at the wrong height. He lay there for a moment getting his bearings, then got up and found the bathroom and stood under the shower until he felt approximately like himself. Claire had left the replacement laces outside his door sometime during the night, in a small paper bag with no note. He threaded them through the Oxford methodically and thought about what Sophia had said, that it was easier to pay attention to shoelaces than to things she couldn't fix. He understood that logic more than he was entirely comfortable with. He found Sophia already in the sitting room when he came through his door. She was in her chair with a cup of coffee and her phone, dressed for the day in a dark gray blouse and fitted trousers, hair pulled back. She looked rested in the way of someone who had slept for a calculated number of hours, rather than a comfortable one. "Coffee's on the table," she said without looking up. He poured a cup from the small carafe and sat on the sofa. "How do you want to play the morning?" he asked. She put her phone down. "Breakfast is with everyone. Martin will be charming and collegial, and will spend the entire meal watching you. Derek will try to create a moment where you feel excluded from the conversation. Don't take the bait on either." "And you?" "I'll be present, but let you be present too. We don't need to perform anything. Just act like we've had breakfast together before." "Have we?" She looked at him. "As of this morning, yes." "Fair enough." They went down together. The breakfast room was smaller and less formal than the dining room, with windows that caught the eastern light and a view of the garden that was actually quite good in the early morning. James and Will were already there, James working through a plate of eggs with the focused efficiency of someone running a mental checklist. Will was reading something on his phone and looked up when they came in. "Morning," Will said. Martin appeared about 10 minutes after they sat down, with the timing of a man who had chosen not to be the first one there. He was in weekend clothes again, pressed, but weekend. He made himself coffee, greeted everyone with the ease of a host in his natural element, and took the chair at the head of the small table that everyone had apparently left open for him without discussing it. Derek came in last. He looked at Sophia first, then Ethan, then Sophia again. He sat. The conversation was light in a way that had tension underneath it, like a frozen surface. It held, but you were aware the whole time that it was holding. Martin asked Will about a property matter in Cincinnati. James said something about a football game. Derek talked about a flight delay the day before with the casual fluency of a man filling air. Ethan drank his coffee and ate and didn't push himself to talk, which he'd decided was the right move. Not withdrawn, just not performing. Present. At one point, Carolyn asked about Lily. Ethan looked at her and then at Sophia, who had mentioned this was possible. "How old did you say she was?" Carolyn asked. She was smiling the careful smile. 7? She must be something. She is, Ethan said. Do you have a picture? He did, on his phone. Several. He thought for a brief second about the calculation of this and then decided that showing a picture of his daughter to a room full of people who were trying to assess him was not actually giving anything away. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photo from Lily's last birthday. Her sitting at the kitchen table with the chocolate cake Sandra had made, a smear of frosting on her nose, looking at the camera with that evaluating expression she'd probably always have. He passed the phone to Carolyn. Something happened in the room when Carolyn looked at the photo. A small shift. A softening in Carolyn's face that was probably genuine, the cousins leaning slightly to see. Even Martin glanced over, though his face didn't change. Derek looked at the photo with the expression of someone encountering a variable they hadn't accounted for. She's wonderful, Carolyn said, and this time there was no careful smile, just something real. Thank you, Ethan said. He took the phone back. Sophia beside him had seen the photo too. He'd angled it her way without quite deciding to. She was looking at her coffee cup now, but something in her expression had shifted in the same way it had the night before when he'd told her about Lily's rent-due comment. A small opening, quickly covered. Martin watched all of this from the head of the table and said nothing. What? The morning passed in the managed, slightly aimless way of wealthy family weekends. A walk in the garden that Ethan joined along with the cousins. A drift into the library where someone had set out late-season flowers that no one commented on. Sophia handled the mobility of the grounds with the matter-of-fact efficiency he was coming to expect from her. She navigated the paths, the doorways, the transitions, and did not appear to want comment on any of it, which was a position he respected. At one point, while Will and James had gone ahead toward the rear of the property, Sophia and Ethan were alone on a garden path. The estate house behind them, just the sound of their movement and the wind in the late September oaks. Patricia Ashe is arriving at noon, Sophia said quietly. The family attorney. Right, you said you couldn't map her loyalties. She's been close to my father since before the company existed. She draws up everything, wills, trust documents, corporate governance. Martin uses her, but she's not his. Or at least she wasn't. A pause. I need to know which way she's reading things now. How do you find that out? I talk to her, and I watch how she talks to me. A pause. And I watch how she looks at Martin. They walked in silence for a moment. Last night you said if you show people where you're soft, they use it, Ethan said. Is that true of everyone in there, or just Martin? She thought about it. Martin, definitely. Derek, yes, in a more professional way. He doesn't attack soft spots, he just leverages them. A pause. Will wouldn't use it. Carolyn probably couldn't. James doesn't pay close enough attention. And Patricia? She was quiet for a moment. I honestly don't know. It was the second time she'd said that about someone, honestly don't know, with the same particular flatness, and he was starting to understand that for Sophia, not knowing was a category of information she found genuinely uncomfortable. What about your father? He said. If he's having a good day and we meet him, what should I know? She stopped the chair. He stopped walking. She was looking at the far hedge line, not at him. My father he was very sharp before the stroke. Built something from nothing, genuinely. He's not a villain. He just trusts the wrong people because he was raised to value family above almost everything else. And Martin has used that. She paused. If you meet him, be direct. He's always respected directness. And don't talk about the company or the board. He gets distressed when the conversation goes there and doesn't always recover quickly. What should I talk about? She almost said something and then stopped, tried again. He liked to fish, she said. When I was young, we used to go up to a lake in Ontario. He talked about the water a lot. A pause. He might not be coherent enough to have a real conversation, but if he is, the water. He likes to talk about the water. She started moving again. Ethan fell back into step beside her, and they were quiet the rest of the way. Patricia Ashe arrived at noon precisely, which told Ethan something about her. She was 70, maybe 72, with white hair cut short and the careful posture of a woman who had spent 50 years in rooms full of men and had developed her physical presence accordingly. She wore a blazer and simple jewelry, and she moved through the entrance hall with the orientation of someone who had been in this house many times and knew exactly which rooms had which purposes. She greeted Martin with a handshake, not a kiss or a hug, greeted Carolyn warmly, greeted the cousins by name, and when she came to Sophia, she held both of Sophia's hands in hers for a moment and looked at her with an attention that was different from everyone else's in this house, more concentrated, less strategic. "You look well," Patricia said. "I'm managing," Sophia said, which was the most honest thing Ethan had heard her say to anyone here. Patricia looked at Ethan then, a measured, thorough look that lasted about 2 seconds and probably took in more than most people's 10. "Ethan Cole," Sophia said. "Patricia Ashe." "Good to meet you," Ethan said. "And you," Patricia said. Nothing more. But she kept his eye for a beat longer than socially necessary, and something in her expression, not approval exactly, but a kind of provisional interest, registered before she moved on. Lunch was the largest gathering of the weekend, all 8 of them at the table, including Patricia, with the addition of a woman named Karen, who was Martin's personal assistant and whose presence at a family lunch felt off in a way nobody directly acknowledged. The food was catered, proper catered, servers, and a multi-course structure, and the formality of it ratcheted the room up several degrees. Martin was in full performance now. He talked about the company's history, the early years, his brother Richard's vision, the growth through the 90s. He told the stories with the practiced authority of someone who has told them many times, and in the telling, he positioned himself as a participant in the founding narrative rather than the peripheral figure Sophia had described. The cousins listened with the polite attention of people who'd heard this before. Patricia Ashe ate her food and said nothing. Derek was quieter at lunch than he'd been at dinner, more watchful, letting Martin establish the tone. Then, about halfway through the second course, Martin set down his fork and looked at Ethan with the expression of a man about to do something he's been planning for a while. "Ethan," he said, and his voice had warmth in it like a heater in a room that's actually cold. "I hope you don't mind if I'm direct." "I prefer it," Ethan said. Martin smiled at this, as if it confirmed something. "You're clearly important to Sophia. She's not someone who brings people into her life easily, as I'm sure you know. So I want to ask you, and this is meant in the spirit of family, you understand? What are your intentions?" The table got quiet in the specific way of people deciding not to look at each other. "My intentions," Ethan said. "Sophia's life is complex. Her responsibilities are significant. I want to understand what a man in your position is looking for in a relationship with a woman in hers." The framing was designed. A man in your position, a woman in hers. It was social distance delivered as a question about love. Ethan had heard versions of this construction before, in smaller rooms with smaller stakes. He looked at Martin for a moment. "I'm not looking for anything other than what we already have," he said. "A relationship with her. That's the whole thing." "Of course," Martin said. "But practically speaking, Ethan said, I don't think it's particularly complicated. I like her. She seems to like me. We take it one day at a time." A pause. "I don't have a long-range strategy for it, if that's what you're asking." Martin held his smile. No one said anything about strategy. "You kind of did," Ethan said, evenly. At the end of the table, Will Bennett picked up his wine glass and looked at the ceiling. Derek had gone very still. Martin's smile didn't drop, but something behind it shifted. A reassessment, quick and invisible to anyone not looking for it. "Fair enough," Martin said, and moved the conversation elsewhere with the practiced ease of a man who has been redirected before and knows how to regroup. Under the table, Sophia's hand found Ethan's wrist. Not a grip, just a brief pressure, 2 seconds, and then gone. He didn't look at her. After lunch, Patricia Ashe found Ethan on the rear terrace. He'd stepped out for air, genuinely. The formality of the meal had a particular suffocating quality, and he needed 5 minutes outside it. He was leaning on the stone balustrade, looking at the garden. She came out through the French doors and stood a few feet away, looking at the same view. "You handled that well," she said. "Martin? I just answered honestly." "That's not what most people do in that room." She was quiet for a moment. "I've known Martin Bennett for 40 years. He has a gift for creating situations where you feel you only have two options, and both of them are his." Ethan looked at her. She was still looking at the garden. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because I want to know what you're actually here for." She said it without aggression, just with the directness of someone who has decided that subtlety is inefficient. "Not the answer you'd give Martin. The real one." He thought about it. "She needed someone," he said. "I was available. The money's real and I needed it. But I'm also—" He paused. "She's in a bad situation, and she's handling it alone, and I don't think that's right." Patricia turned and looked at him, really looked, with the full weight of whatever she'd accumulated in 70 years of reading people in rooms. "The money," she said. 45,000. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She nodded slowly. "At least you didn't say it was entirely about her." "I'm not trying to be a hero. She asked for help, and I said yes, and now I'm here." Patricia looked back at the garden. "Richard Bennett is one of the better men I've met in a long career," she said. "Martin has spent 2 years managing what Richard sees and hears. Richard thinks Martin is holding the company together out of love for the family. He doesn't know about the board strategy or the marriage pressure." She paused. "He should know, but no one's been in a position to tell him without it looking like an attack." Ethan was quiet. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I'm just informing you of the landscape." "Why?" She looked at him again. "Because Sophia trusts you, and Sophia doesn't trust easily, and I've been watching her for 30 years, and I'd like things to go differently for her than they've been going." She paused. "And because you answered Martin's question without backing down and without being rude, and in that room today, that was hard to do." She went back inside. Ethan stood on the terrace for a while, the wind off the garden moving through his jacket, thinking about what she'd said. He met Richard Bennett at 4 o'clock. Sophia's hand had tightened slightly on her push rim when the message came from the care team. Good day, coherent, asking if Sophia was there. She'd looked at Ethan with something that wasn't quite a question, and he'd said simply, "I'll come if you want me to." She did. Richard Bennett's rooms in the East Wing were quiet and warm and smelled like old books and a particular cedar wood. He was in a chair by the window. Thin, 70-something, with Sophia's bone structure in an older, more worn version. His left hand had a residual tremor, and one side of his face had the slightly softened look of a man who'd had a significant neurological event. But his eyes, when they turned to Sophia, were clear. "There she is," he said. His voice was slower than it had probably been, more deliberate, but the tone in it when he looked at his daughter was unmistakable. "Hi, Dad." Sophia moved close and took his hand. The right one. The one that didn't shake. Her voice did something it hadn't done all weekend. It went softer. Not performed soft, just actually soft, like something she'd been holding closed had opened slightly. Richard looked at Ethan with a calm, curious attention. "This is Ethan," Sophia said. "Ethan." Richard said the name the way you say a name when you're locking it in. "Ethan Cole?" "Yes, sir." Richard looked at his daughter. "You told me about him." "I did." Richard looked back at Ethan for a long moment. There was a faint cloud in his right eye, the aftermath of the stroke, probably, but the focus behind it was real. "You work with your hands," Richard said. "Yes." "What kind of work?" "Engines, mostly. Mechanical repair." Richard nodded slowly. "My father was a machinist. I grew up watching him work. There's honesty to that kind of work. When it's fixed, it's fixed. You know whether you did it right." "That's true," Ethan said. "No hiding from it." "No hiding from it," Richard repeated, with the slight echo of a man who appreciated the phrase. A pause. He seemed to drift slightly and then return. "Sophia tells me you have a daughter." "Lily, she's 7. What's she like?" Ethan thought about it. "She pays attention to things, more than most adults I know. She's got a serious face, but she's funny when she wants to be. She's the kind of kid who doesn't ask for much but notices everything. Richard's expression shifted. Not a smile exactly, but something related to one. He looked at Sophia. "That's a good answer," he said quietly, like he was telling Sophia something rather than Ethan. Sophia's jaw was set in a way Ethan recognized as her holding something together. They stayed for about 20 minutes. Richard talked about the lake in Ontario. Unprompted, he brought it up himself, something about the light in the early morning on the water. He described the particular quality of lake silence and how it was different from river silence and different again from ocean silence. And he was lucid and specific about it in a way that was clearly a window to something that had been true about him all his life, some particular way of paying attention to the world. Ethan asked questions and Richard answered them, and for those 20 minutes the room felt very different from the rest of the estate, less managed, less maneuvered. When they left and went back through the corridor to the main house, Sophia was quiet for a long time. Finally she said, without looking at him, "He liked you." "He's a good man." "Yes." A pause. "He is." They reached the main corridor. Through the wall, somewhere in the house, Ethan could hear Martin's voice, the particular volume of a man used to filling rooms. The dinner was in 2 hours. Sophia stopped her chair. "Tonight is going to be harder than last night," she said. "Martin is going to use the dinner to make his case openly. Derek will be positioned alongside him. They'll try to make you feel like the room is against you, like you don't belong in a conversation this big." She looked at him directly. "Don't let them." "I don't plan on it." She looked at him for a moment with that measuring attention she had, and then something shifted in it. Something that wasn't strategy, wasn't calculation. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "If tonight goes badly..." She stopped. "I need you to understand that whatever happens, I don't expect you to take damage for me. You came here for a weekend. You fulfilled what I asked for. If Martin does what I think he's planning to do tonight, it might get..." She seemed to be choosing the word carefully. "Ugly." He looked at her. "What do you think he's planning?" She exhaled slowly. "I think he's going to put the choice on the table openly, in front of the family, in front of Patricia. He's going to frame the marriage arrangement as the responsible option and my resistance as instability. And he's going to use your presence, a man from outside, no money, no social position, as evidence that I'm not thinking clearly." The corridor was quiet. "He's going to use me as the argument," Ethan said. "Yes." "For why you can't be trusted to run the company." "Yes." He stood in the corridor with his hands in his jacket pockets and thought about that for a moment. About Martin's handshake and the question at lunch. About Patricia on the terrace telling him about Richard and what Richard didn't know. About Lily's face at the kitchen table. About the $45,000 that suddenly felt like it occupied a very strange place in the context of everything else. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Okay," he said again. 2 hours to dinner. You should tell me everything you know about what Martin has planned." She looked at him for a long moment. "All of it," he said. Something in her face changed. Not the careful, managed expression she'd held all weekend, not the professional neutrality. Something underneath all of it, something quieter and more unguarded. Something that looked a lot like what it means to find out you're not actually alone. "Come on then," she said, and turned her chair back toward their rooms. He followed her down the corridor, toward the light, toward the dinner that was coming. For the 2 hours before dinner, Sophia talked and Ethan listened. She told him what she knew and what she suspected, which were 2 different categories she kept carefully separated. Martin had spent the past 3 months meeting individually with 4 of the 7 board members who were soft, not hostile to Sophia, but persuadable. He'd framed each conversation around the same core argument, that the company needed continuity of leadership structure, that Sophia was brilliant but singular, and that singular was a liability in a company this size. He'd never said anything that could be used against him. He'd planted questions and let them grow. The marriage arrangement was the proposed solution to the problem he'd created. Derek, as co-executive partner, family connected through marriage, provided exactly the redundancy narrative Martin had been seeding for months. The upcoming weekend was Martin's public move, the gathering where he would bring all the pieces into the same room and make the obvious case that this was simply good governance. What Martin didn't know, Sophia told him, was that Patricia Ashe had been quietly reviewing the trust documents that governed Richard Bennett's controlling shares, and that there was a provision in her father's original governance structure that directly limited any transfer of executive authority during the incapacity of the founding shareholder without a unanimous board vote. Martin had been operating as though he already had that authority. He didn't entirely, and Patricia knew it. "Why hasn't Patricia moved on that already?" Ethan said. "Because she needed something to move toward," Sophia said. Not just evidence of overreach, but evidence of Sophia's stability and the wrongness of what Martin was doing. She needed both sides of the argument in the same room. He looked at her. "This weekend." "This weekend? She came here for you." "She came here for my father," Sophia said, which is the same thing in the end. They sat in the small sitting room with the early evening light coming through the windows, and Sophia walked him through the board members, the governance documents, the specific language in the trust that mattered. She explained things with the focused clarity of someone who had been carrying all of it alone for months and found the act of saying it out loud to another person physically different from just knowing it internally. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence and said, "You don't have to remember all of this." "I know," he said. "Keep going." She looked at him for a moment and then kept going. The formal dinner was at 7:30. Ethan came downstairs in the navy jacket, the white dress shirt, the dark trousers. He'd shaved carefully, and he'd gotten the collar right, and the laces on the black Oxford were new and held properly, and when he looked at himself in the mirror before coming down, he thought he looked like a version of himself that he didn't entirely recognize but couldn't argue with. Sophia was waiting at the bottom of the staircase. She'd changed into a deep burgundy dress, simple and well cut, her hair down. She was wearing small gold earrings he hadn't seen before, and she held herself with the particular bearing of a woman who had been preparing for something difficult for a long time and had finally reached the moment of it. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Ready?" she said. "No," he said honestly. "Let's go anyway." Something moved at the edge of her mouth. They went in together. The dining room was set with the full formality of a place that knew how to do formality. Candles, proper crystal, 3 forks per setting. Everyone was already assembled when they entered, gathered near the sideboard with drinks, and the way the room's attention moved when they walked in told Ethan that everyone had been waiting, and everyone knew why. Martin was at the sideboard. He turned and smiled at Sophia with the warmth of a man who had everything arranged exactly as he wanted it. Derek was beside Martin, and his eyes went to Ethan with the cool, appraising look of someone who had spent the afternoon deciding how to use the next few hours. Patricia Ashe was in the corner near the window with a glass of wine and an expression that revealed nothing. Carolyn was fussing with the centerpiece in the way of a woman who needs something to do with her hands. The cousins, James straight-backed and careful, Will slightly pale, were positioned on the opposite side of the room from Martin, which Ethan suspected was intentional on Will's part. They sat. 7 at the table. Karen, the assistant, had not appeared for the evening meal, which meant Martin had decided this dinner was family only, which meant he was ready to say things he didn't want a witness to. For the first half of dinner, Martin was almost theatrical in his pleasantness. He asked about James's property project in Cincinnati. He complimented the food. He drew Carolyn into a brief exchange about some renovation they'd been planning. He was a genial host, and he was doing it deliberately, letting the comfort build, letting people settle into their chairs, letting the candles and the wine do their quiet work of lowering defenses. Derek was performing the same ease, a slightly younger version of the same register. Comfortable here, among these people, in this house. Ethan ate and watched and waited. It came in the third course, the same way these things always come. In the middle of something ordinary, when the timing least invites resistance. Martin set down his fork, leaned back slightly, and looked at Sophia with the expression of a man about to say something reasonable. "I want to raise something," he said, "because I think this is the right moment and the right people." He looked around the table with the inclusive warmth of a man gathering consensus he'd already arranged. The November board meeting is 6 weeks out. I think everyone here knows that the company is at a meaningful decision point, and I think Sophia knows I've been concerned, not critically, just as someone who loves this family, about the narrative around leadership stability. Sophia said nothing. She held her wine glass and looked at her uncle with the flat, contained attention Ethan had come to understand as her most guarded state. Derek has been an extraordinary asset to the company, Martin continued, operationally exceptional, and Martin smiled. He cares about this family, about Sophia, about the company's future in the right way. He paused. I think the board would respond very well to a formalized partnership, professionally and personally. It solves the succession question, it provides the continuity narrative we need, and frankly, it's a good match. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing anyone had said all evening. Martin, Carolyn started. Let me finish, darling. Not unkind, just final. He looked at Sophia. I know you have reservations, but I want you to hear it said plainly, in front of the people who matter to both of us. This arrangement is the right thing for the company and for this family, and I believe if you set aside the personal feelings for a moment and look at it structurally, you know that too. The candles burned, the crystal caught the light. Outside the windows, the dark grounds of the estate were perfectly still. Sophia said, Are you done? Martin's expression shifted slightly. I'm being direct because I think you deserve directness. You're being direct, Sophia said, because you've arranged this room and this evening very carefully, and you think this is the moment where I run out of room to maneuver. She set her wine glass down. I'm not going to marry Derek Harmon. Sophia, I'm not going to marry anyone because a board narrative requires it, and I'm going to say this once clearly in front of Patricia and in front of this family because I want it on record that I said it. What you've been doing for the past 2 years is not management. It's not family support. It's a sustained and deliberate effort to reposition yourself as the company's operational authority, using my father's illness as the vehicle. Martin's face went still. Derek straightened. That's not, Martin started. Let me finish, Sophia said, and her voice was level and hard in the way of a floor that will hold whatever you put on it. You've managed what information reaches my father. You've met privately with board members using framing designed to make my leadership look like a liability. You've invited the man you chose for me to a family weekend as though the decision was already made, and you've done all of it while calling it love for this family. Martin recovered his composure fast. He was genuinely good at this. You're under considerable stress, he said, with the measured concern of a doctor addressing a patient. The board election, the pressure you've been carrying, it's understandable that you'd see things in. Don't, Ethan said. The word dropped into the room, and the room changed. Martin looked at him. Really looked. For the first time since the handshake at the front door. Not the assessment of an inferior, but the full attention of a man recalibrating. Excuse me? Martin said. Ethan set his fork down on the plate carefully, because he'd learned that careful movements in a heated room carried more weight than aggressive ones. Don't tell her she's not seeing clearly, he said. Don't do the thing where you describe her argument as a symptom of her stress. She's been specific and she's been accurate, and you know she has. And the move where you question her perception instead of her facts it's the oldest one in the book, and she doesn't deserve it. The table was extremely quiet. Martin's eyes had gone cold in the way of a man who has been patient long enough. I understand you care about her, Martin said. That's evident. But with respect, you don't know this family. You don't know this company. You don't know the complexities of what's been required to keep this organization stable, while Richard... He caught himself. While things have been difficult, you're a mechanic from a small town who has known Sophia for 4 months. And that means something, I'm sure. But it doesn't qualify you to speak to what this family needs. Ethan nodded slowly, like he was considering the point. You're right that I don't know this company, he said. But I know what I've watched this weekend. I watched you tell a room full of people that your niece's choice of partner makes her an instability risk. I watched you invite the man you picked for her to a family dinner like it was already decided. I watched you spend 2 days being charming and reasonable and working on everyone in this room individually. He paused. I've seen smaller operations do the same thing, with less money and less polish, and it looks the same regardless of the scale. Martin's jaw had set. Derek spoke then. His voice was controlled and even. I don't think this is productive, he said. Sophia, whatever your concerns about the arrangement, Derek. Sophia looked at him directly. I need you to understand something. I have nothing against you personally. What I have against is being a strategic asset rather than a person. If you can't see the difference between those two things,
then Martin's read on you is probably accurate, and this conversation is over either way. Derek went quiet. Will Bennett, across the table, had his hands flat on the tablecloth and was looking at the center of it like a man holding still in a high wind. James was staring at his plate. It was Patricia Ashe who spoke next. She set her wine glass down with a precise, deliberate sound and looked at Martin with the attention of a woman who had been in rooms like this for 5 decades and had decided this was the room where something changed. "Martin," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you in front of everyone here because I think the private conversations have run their course." She paused.
I reviewed the original trust structure last month. The provisions governing Richard's controlling shares during incapacity are specific. Consolidated operational authority requires a unanimous board vote, not the informal assumption of authority that's been in practice for the past 18 months. What you've been exercising is not sanctioned by the documents. Martin's face went through several things quickly. "Patricia, this is not the time. I've been deciding when the time was for 2 years," she said. "I think it's now." She looked at Sophia. "Your father built this provision specifically to prevent exactly this kind of consolidation. He told me when we drafted it. He said, and I remember this very clearly, that the company should belong to whoever is the right person to run it, not whoever is standing closest when the original person can't." The candles flickered in some draft from the door. Martin was very still. "You want to talk about family?" Ethan said, and his voice was quiet now, rather than confrontational, because the room had shifted and the quiet was more useful. "About what this family needs. But from what I've seen this weekend, what this family needs is for one person in it to be treated like a person instead of a problem to be solved, like someone whose choices about her own life are hers to make." He looked at Martin directly. "She's not a succession plan. She's not a liability. She's a woman who built something, and she's your niece. And if you spent half the energy on actually supporting her that you've spent on maneuvering around her, none of us would be sitting here right now." The room held very still. Martin looked at Ethan for a long moment. Something had gone out of his performance. Not everything, not the pride or the intelligence, but the particular energy of a man who believes the room is running the way he designed it. That energy was gone. "You don't know what it took," Martin said, and for the first time all weekend his voice had something raw underneath it. "To hold this company together. To make the decisions no one else was making. Richard couldn't—" He stopped. Something moved in his face. Not remorse, not exactly, but something like the shadow of it. The brief awareness of the distance between what he'd told himself his motivations were and what they actually might be. The company would have suffered. "Maybe," Sophia said. Her voice had lost the hardness. Not the steadiness, just the hardness. "Maybe it would have, in the short term. But it was mine to make those decisions. It was mine to make mistakes with, and you didn't let me." Martin looked at his niece, the man at the head of the table, in his well-pressed weekend shirt, with his silver hair and his 40 years of managing rooms and people and outcomes. He looked at Sophia, and for a moment, he was just an old man who had done something he probably couldn't entirely undo, and knew it. He picked up his fork. He set it back down. He pushed back his chair and stood, and he walked out of the dining room without saying anything else, and the sound of his footsteps on the stone floor was the loudest thing in the house for about 10 seconds. Carolyn made a small, distressed sound and looked after him, and then looked at Sophia with an expression that was genuinely helpless, and then got up and followed him. Derek sat at the table for a moment in the particular position of a man whose scaffolding has been removed and who is figuring out what that means for his posture. Then he set his napkin down, folded it neatly, which somehow was the most revealing thing Ethan had seen him do all weekend, and stood. "Sophia," he said. His voice had lost the polish. He sounded younger. "For what it's worth, I did think about it, what it would actually mean. The arrangement." He paused. "I don't know if that matters." Sophia looked at him for a moment. "It matters a little," she said. "Not enough, but a little." He nodded once and left. James and Will were still at the table. James looked like a man who had watched a building come down and wasn't sure which direction to walk. Will was looking at Sophia with something that was uncomplicated and genuine. Relief, mostly, and something like pride. "Well," Will said. Well, Sophia said. Patricia Ashe refilled her wine glass, looked at Ethan with the same brief, concentrated attention she'd given him on the terrace, and said, "You're staying for dessert." It wasn't a question. "Sure," Ethan said. Later, much later, after the dessert that was mostly untouched, after Patricia had drawn Sophia into a separate room for 45 minutes of what was clearly a detailed legal conversation, after Will had quietly said goodnight to both of them with a handshake for Ethan that held more in it than a handshake usually does, Ethan and Sophia were in the sitting room again. It was past 11. The estate was quiet. The fountain was still audible, faintly. Sophia had her jacket off and was sitting in her chair with the particular posture of someone who has spent an enormous amount of compressed energy in a short time and is now processing the aftermath of it. Not collapsed. Nothing about her ever quite collapsed, but quieter than she'd been. "Patricia is going to send formal notice to the board on Monday," she said, "about the governance provisions. Martin will have to respond, and when he does, the record will show that he's been operating outside sanctioned authority." A pause. "It won't be fast, it won't be clean, but it changes the November vote." "Does he fight it?" "Probably. But he fights it on legal ground now, not personal narrative. That's a completely different terrain." She paused. "He might win parts of it. He's not without resources. But the marriage arrangement is dead. That's the thing that mattered most." She looked at her hands in her lap for a moment. "You didn't have to say what you said," she said. "Somebody needed to. That's not what you were paid for." He looked at her. "No," he said, "it's not." The sitting room held its quiet. "Are you angry with me?" she said, "for putting you in that position, for not telling you fully how it was going to go?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I think you told me what you could, and I think I knew going into that dinner that it was going to be what it was. You didn't have to defend me." "I know." "But you did." "I know," he said again. She was quiet for a long time. The fountain, the dark grounds, the weight of the weekend sitting in the room with them, all of it. Martin's handshake and the photograph of Lily and Richard Bennett's voice talking about the quality of light on a lake in Ontario, and Patricia on the terrace telling him things she needed him to know. "I need to tell you something," Sophia said. Her voice was different, not careful, not managed. "I have to be honest about it because I've been not honest about smaller things in my life for a long time, and I'm very tired of it." He waited. "This wasn't just about the weekend," she said. "Whatever I told myself when I was planning it, I looked you up because of the fleet account invoices and because of what people said about you, yes. But I also looked you up because I was looking for someone, and I couldn't explain exactly what kind of someone. And when I read the invoices and talked to people and understood the shape of you, and I thought, that's the shape. That's the person." She stopped. She looked at him with the most unguarded expression he'd seen from her. No strategy in it, no management, just a woman saying a true thing and not being sure what was going to happen next. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "I recognize it might not be. I'm aware that I hired you for a weekend, and I'm telling you something I shouldn't be telling you, and I also can't—" She stopped again. "I don't know how to have this conversation. I've been a CEO longer than I've been anything else, and this is not a conversation I have." Ethan sat on the sofa in the sitting room of the Bennett estate, in his borrowed coat, with grease probably still faint in the creases of his knuckles, regardless of how carefully he'd scrubbed, and he looked at Sophia Bennett. He thought about what was true. "I'm going back to a shop with a leaking compressor and a bad fluorescent tube and a daughter who notices everything," he said. "That's my actual life. That's what I'm going back to." "I know." "And you have a board election and a legal fight and a company." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I also," he said carefully, "sat in a dining room tonight and watched you take everything Martin threw at you and stand completely straight, and I think that's one of the harder things I've seen anyone do." He paused. "So I'm not dismissing what you said. I'm just being clear about what we're both walking back into." She nodded slowly. Something in her face had settled, not disappointed, not relieved. Something more like the expression of a person who has taken a risk they could manage and found the outcome to be neither catastrophic nor resolved, but real. "Okay," she said. Okay, he said. They stayed in the sitting room a while longer, not talking much, the quiet between them different from the quiet at the start of the weekend. Less like the distance between two strangers, and more like the specific, slightly fragile quiet of two people who have been through something together and are still figuring out what to call it. They left Sunday afternoon. The morning had been quiet in the specific way that follows something significant. People moving carefully around each other, conversations careful and short, the house holding a different quality of air than it had on Friday. Martin did not come to breakfast. Carolyn appeared briefly, put food on her plate without eating much of it, and said a few things that were kind in shape but hollow in content. James left early, citing something about the drive. Will shook Sophia's hand and then, after a slight hesitation, hugged her, brief, a little awkward, genuinely meant. He shook Ethan's hand again and looked at him with the same expression as the night before, the one that held more than a handshake usually does. Patricia Ashe left before anyone else was up. She'd slipped a card under Sophia's door during the night. Sophia read it at the small table in the sitting room with her morning coffee and didn't tell Ethan what it said, but something in her posture when she put it down was different, steadier, like a structure that had been reinforced overnight. Derek was gone before breakfast. No goodbye, no note. Just the absence of the black company car in the front lot when Ethan looked out the window at 7. The drive back was different from the drive out. On Friday, they'd been two people with an arrangement and a lot of careful distance. Now they sat in the back of the Mercedes with 60-some miles of Ohio between them and where they were going, and the careful distance was gone, replaced by something that didn't quite have a name yet. Not closeness exactly, but the specific awareness of another person that you get after you've been through something with them. Sophia looked out the window for a long time. Ethan let her. About halfway back, she said, Patricia's note said my father has a good legal team who has been quietly reviewing Martin's actions for the past 8 months. She's been building the record. She anticipated this. She anticipated something. She's been Patricia Ashe for 70 years. She anticipates most things. Is your father going to be told everything? Sophia was quiet for a moment. Patricia thinks he should know, carefully, in stages. He'll be hurt. She paused on the word. He loves Martin. Whatever Martin has done, my father loves him. And that's not going to change just because the facts are what they are. Another pause. But he also built something, and he built it for a reason, and I think he'd want to know. He's stronger than he looks, Ethan said. Your father. She looked at him. The way he talked about the water, Ethan said. That kind of attention to things. That's not fragility. That's somebody who decided a long time ago to really look at the world. He paused. That kind of person handles hard things better than you'd expect. Sophia held his gaze for a moment, and then looked back out the window, and something in her shoulders came down slightly. Not defeat, the opposite. Like she'd been carrying a concern and had just put part of it down. I used to fish with him, she said quietly. When I was 10, 11, he had this old tackle box that he refused to replace even when it was held together with a bungee cord. He said a new one wouldn't know where anything was. She paused. I haven't gone fishing in 20 years. You could. He can't navigate the terrain anymore. There are accessible fishing spots, Ethan said. Decent ones. I take Lily to one by the reservoir sometimes. He paused. I'm just saying, it's solvable. She looked at him. That quiet thing moved across her face again. The one that wasn't quite a smile. The one that was more than a smile, really. Something genuine. You're very practical, she said. I fix things for a living, he said. Everything looks like it has a solution. Does it? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. But most things have a next step. And usually the next step is enough. She dropped him at the shop at 4:15. Marcus's car was in the lot, which meant Marcus had actually come in on a Sunday for reasons Ethan had not asked him to, which was either loyalty or curiosity, and was probably both. The bent sign was exactly where it had always been. The parking lot crack caught the late afternoon light. The compressor was almost certainly still leaking. Ethan got his bag out of the trunk and stood beside the car for a moment. Sophia had her window down. She was looking at him with the straightforward attention that he'd come to understand was just how she looked when she wasn't managing anything. Thank you, she said. You already thanked me. I'm thanking you again. He looked at the shop, then back at her. The 15,000? I'll see it before end of week? It's already transferred. Check your account. He hadn't checked. He pulled out his phone, looked at his banking app, and felt the number hit him in the chest the way real money does when you haven't had it. Not a thrill exactly, more like the sudden absence of a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd stop noticing it. He put his phone away. The rest on Tuesday, she said. Okay. They looked at each other. Sophia, he said. Yeah. What you said last night, in the sitting room, I've been thinking about it. She waited, completely still. I think you should know that I'm not... He paused, choosing carefully. I'm not the kind of person who hears something like that and just moves on from it, okay? I want to be clear about that. Something moved in her face. Okay, she said, but I also meant what I said about being clear-eyed about the distance between our lives. I know you did. So I don't know what the right shape of this is, he said. I genuinely don't. But I don't think I want to just go back to not knowing you. She looked at him for a long moment. The late afternoon light hit the side of her face and caught her eyes, and she looked tired and something else. Something that had been there all weekend, underneath the CEO and the careful bearing and the strategy. Something that was just a woman who had been fighting alone for a very long time and was sitting at the edge of not having to. Okay, she said again, softer this time. Okay, he said. He got his bag. He went inside. He didn't look back at the car because looking back felt like the wrong move, and some instinct told him she'd appreciate that. Marcus was in Bay 2 with the compressor. He looked up when Ethan came in, looked at the bag, looked at the coat, looked at the bag again. Good weekend? Marcus said. Interesting weekend. You want to talk about it? No. Marcus looked at the compressor. I figured out the leak, he said. It's the fitting on the secondary line, 20-minute fix. Good, Ethan said. You're welcome, Marcus said. Ethan put his bag in the office, hung the coat on the hook behind the door, and changed into his work jeans and his old flannel. He came back out into the bay, crouched down next to Marcus, and looked at the fitting. Show me, he said. Marcus showed him. It was a 20-minute fix. He picked Lily up from Sandra's at 6:30. She was in the middle of a board game with Sandra and made him wait 4 minutes while the game reached a natural stopping point, which he did without objection because he understood the principle. On the drive home, she sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window in the quiet way she had, letting the silence accumulate until she was ready to say something. He'd learned not to prompt this. Did it go okay? She said, about halfway home. Yeah, he said. It went okay. She seemed to process this. Was it worth it? He thought about the dining room, about Martin's face when the scaffolding came down, about Richard Bennett's voice talking about the water, about Sophia in the sitting room saying a true thing and not being sure what would happen next. Yeah, he said. It was worth it. She nodded. Then, Sandra let me watch 2 movies. Both past 9? The second one ended at 9:14. I'll allow it. She almost smiled, looked back out the window. After a moment, she said, You sound different. Different how? She considered it with the serious thoroughness she brought to things. Less like the rents do, she said. He looked at the road ahead and felt something ease in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. Yeah, he said, less like that. Team. The weeks that followed were not tidy. Real things never are. Patricia Ashe sent formal notice to the Bennett Group board on the Monday following the weekend, as she'd said she would. The document was 38 pages, cross-referenced the relevant trust provisions, and detailed 18 months of procedural overreach with the particular thoroughness of a woman who had been building a record since the beginning and had no interest in leaving any room for ambiguity. Martin retained his own legal team within 48 hours. He issued a statement through the company's PR office describing the challenge as a misreading of long-standing governance practice and expressing confidence in a resolution. The statement was careful and well-crafted and landed exactly as well as a carefully crafted statement from a man caught overreaching lands, which is to say, not well. Sophia called Ethan on the Wednesday after the weekend, not a business call. She made that distinction explicitly, which he appreciated. Patricia's filing is generating attention, she said. The board members who are soft are suddenly asking to meet with me. 3 of them in the past 2 days. Because the narrative shifted. Because the narrative shifted. Martin was selling stability. Now he looks like the instability. She paused. I want to be careful about being too optimistic. He still has resources, and he still has board relationships I haven't fully mapped. But you have Patricia. I have Patricia. And the governance documents. And the documents. He was in the shop office, the door closed, his boots up on the desk. The compressor was running properly in the bay. Fixed, quiet, doing its job. The fluorescent tube in Bay 1 had been replaced. The parking lot crack was on a list that was now third from the top instead of languishing at the bottom. How are you? He said. A small pause. Tired, she said, but the good kind. The kind you get from work that's actually going somewhere. Yeah, he said. I know that kind. How's Lily? Back to normal. Told me the second grade social landscape is complicated but manageable. Sophia made a sound that was close to a laugh. Not performed, just a brief real thing. He found he'd been waiting for it without knowing he was. I'd like to come out there, she said. Not for anything specific, just, I'd like to see the shop. The shop's not much to see. I know what the shop is, she said. I've seen the invoices. The invoices make it sound more organized than it is. Ethan, yeah. I'd like to come out, she said, with the particular directness of a woman who has decided that the time she spent being indirect about things she wanted was time she was done wasting. Saturday morning, he said. I'll be in early. We can get coffee after. Okay. Lily will probably interrogate you. A pause. I've handled Martin Bennett in a 38-page legal filing this week. I think I can manage a 7-year-old. That's what everyone thinks before they meet her. Another pause, and this time he heard the laugh actually land, small and genuine, and it was the best thing he'd heard all week. She came Saturday. The Mercedes pulled into the lot at 8:15, and Sophia came through the bay door in a different version of herself than the woman who'd first walked in 3 weeks earlier. More casual, a dark jacket over a simple shirt, no visible strategy in her posture. Just a person coming to see a place. She looked around at the bays, at the cars in various states of work, at the bent sign through the open bay door, at the coffee maker on the workbench that was approximately as old as several of the vehicles he worked on. It looks like the invoices, she said. I said it wasn't much. I didn't say that. She looked at a 2006 Tacoma up on the lift. What's wrong with that one? Rear differential. It's been making a noise the owner describes as ominous. Is it ominous? Little bit. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a slightly charged, slightly ridiculous quality to the moment, the CEO and the mechanic in the morning light of a small Ohio shop, and they both seemed to feel it at the same time, and neither of them tried to manage it away. Coffee, he said. Please. He poured 2 cups from the ancient maker. She took hers and held it in both hands, and they stood in Bay 1 with the ominous Tacoma above them and the September light coming through the open door, and it felt not like an arrangement, not like strategy, just like 2 people standing in a garage on a Saturday morning, which was one of the more honest things Ethan had felt in a long time. Lily arrived with Sandra at 9 because Sandra was dropping her off after an overnight, and she came through the bay door with her backpack on and stopped exactly 2 feet inside when she saw Sophia. She looked at Sophia for a moment with the full weight of her assessment expression. You're her, Lily said. Lily, Ethan started. The work trip lady, Lily said. Sophia looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the ceiling briefly. I didn't specifically tell her. Sandra told me, Lily said, without shame. She was still looking at Sophia with the direct, unblinking attention of a child who has decided something is worth examining. You're in a wheelchair. I am, Sophia said. Does it go fast? Faster than you'd think. Lily considered this as a potential advantage. Did you buy my dad those fancy clothes? Lily, I'm just asking. Yes, Sophia said. I needed him to have appropriate clothes for the occasion. Lily looked at her father. What does that mean? It means I didn't have a jacket that was right for where we were going. You have a jacket. A different kind of jacket. Lily seemed to find this explanation adequate, or at least uninteresting enough to drop. She looked back at Sophia. He said the trip was worth it. Sophia looked at Ethan. Did he? He said it was the good kind of tired, Lily added, with the faint pride of a person delivering a well-sourced fact. Sophia was quiet for a moment, and her expression did the thing it had been doing all along. That small interior motion, the light turning on briefly, and this time it stayed on a little longer before she controlled it. "I'm glad," she said. Lily seemed to conduct a final rapid assessment of Sophia, the wheelchair, the coffee cup in Sophia's hands, and the overall quality of the Saturday morning. "Can we get donuts?" she said, to the room generally. They got donuts. The board vote happened on November 14th, as scheduled. Ethan followed the news the way you follow news about something happening to someone you care about. Imperfectly, from a distance, with the particular helpless awareness that the outcome is being decided in rooms you're not in by people you don't know, and all you can do is wait. Sophia texted him that morning, "Going in. Patricia's with me. I'll call when I know." He was under a Subaru with a head gasket issue when his phone buzzed at 3:17 in the afternoon. He slid out from under the car. 5-2. "I have the board." He sat on the concrete floor of Bay 1 for a moment, the phone in his hand, the afternoon light coming through the bay door and falling across the floor in a long rectangle. He typed back, "Knew it." 3 seconds later, "You did not know it. I had a strong feeling." A pause. Then, "I'm going to go deal with about 900 things. I'll call you tonight. Go deal with your 900 things." Another pause. Longer. Then, "Ethan." He waited. "Thank you for coming with me to that house." He looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed, "Thank you for driving 40 miles to a small shop and asking me to." He put his phone in his pocket and went back under the Subaru. Martin Bennett filed a formal legal challenge to the board vote in December. It was the expected move and everyone had prepared for it. The challenge was detailed and costly and argued several provisions with genuine legal sophistication. Martin had not accumulated 40 years of influence by being sloppy. The proceedings would run through most of the following year. But the challenge had no injunctive power. Sophia ran the company. She ran it with the operational intensity of someone who had been waiting for the space to do it properly, and she ran it well. Not without mistakes, not without the occasional decision that needed revisiting, but with the specific, hard-won competence of a person who understood their organization at every level because they'd spent years fighting to hold on to it. She and Ethan figured out the distance problem the same way most people figure out distance problems. Not by solving it cleanly, but by deciding it wasn't actually the obstacle it appeared to be. She came to the shop on Saturdays when the board schedule allowed. He drove to Columbus on the occasional Wednesday evening when Marcus could open the next morning. They had dinner in the city once, at a restaurant she liked, and he wore the navy jacket that had gotten him through the Bennett estate weekend, and she teased him about the shoelaces. And they split a bottle of wine and talked for 3 hours without running out of things to say. Lily warmed to Sophia the way Lily warmed to most things. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the steady irreversibility of water finding its level. She asked Sophia questions with the relentless precision of a second grader conducting an informal investigation. She showed Sophia the grade on her math worksheet. She wanted to know how fast the wheelchair actually went. And Sophia, on one memorable Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of the shop, demonstrated with enough velocity that Lily laughed with the full-body helplessness of a 7-year-old who has seen something delightfully unexpected. Ethan watched from the bay door with his coffee and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 5 years. Richard Bennett met Sophia's situation with the difficulty Patricia had predicted. Hurt, confusion, the long grief of a man understanding that someone he trusted had operated in his blind spot for years. He and Martin had 2 conversations that Sophia was not present for and did not ask about, because she understood that her father needed to grieve that relationship in his own way, and the best thing she could do was be there when he needed her, and not demand a particular shape from his process. Richard called Ethan once, in February. Ethan wasn't sure how he'd gotten the number. Patricia, probably. And the call was brief and slightly halting in the way of Richard's speech, but clear. "Sophia tells me you took her fishing," Richard said. "A few weeks ago, just the reservoir outside Millerton. Nothing fancy." "She said she didn't catch anything." "She didn't. She's got good patience, but her casting needs work." A pause. Something that might have been a laugh. "She always rushed the cast, even as a kid." Another pause. "Thank you for taking her." She enjoyed it, Ethan said. I think she needed the quiet. She does, Richard said. She always did. She forgot that about herself for a while. A pause. I think you reminded her. Ethan didn't know exactly what to say to that, so he said, She's going to be fine, Mr. Bennett. She's going to be more than fine. A long pause. I know, Richard said, with the quiet weight of a man who has been afraid of a thing for years and is only recently beginning to believe it isn't going to happen. I know she is. In March, Sophia launched the foundation. She told Ethan about it in January, over the phone, late. She always called late after the day's work was done, when the professional performance was off and she was just herself. I want to build something for women in situations like mine, she said. Not exactly like mine. Most people don't have the legal and financial resources I had. That's partly the point. I want to build the legal and financial support structure for women dealing with institutional control, family-based, corporate-based, whatever the form. The kind of resources that let you fight back when you don't have a Patricia Ashe in your corner. What are you calling it? A pause. I've been thinking about that. I keep coming back to something your daughter said. He waited. She said you look less like the rents due, Sophia said. I keep thinking about that. About what that looks like. When the weight comes off. When you're not just surviving the situation, but actually starting to come out of it. A pause. I want to call it the Way Forward Foundation. It's simple and maybe not very original, but I keep thinking that's what it is. It's not about removing the problem. It's about there being a way forward even when the problem is still there. He thought about it. I like it, he said. Lily named it, Sophia said. Technically. She'll want credit for that. She can have it. The foundation launched in March with a press event that Sophia handled with the focused precision she brought to everything, and it landed well, partly because the story of what she'd survived with her uncle was now partially public record through the legal proceedings, and partly because Sophia turned out to be a very effective spokesperson for the thing she'd built, because she spoke about it not as a philanthropy project, but as the resource she'd needed and hadn't had. Ethan watched the press event on a live stream from the shop office, on his phone, with the door mostly closed so Marcus couldn't see him watching it. He watched Sophia field questions with the same flat, calm authority she'd used against Martin's dinner table maneuver, except now there was something else underneath it. Not just controlled defense, but genuine forward momentum. The energy of a person who has found the thing they're building toward and has started building. After it was over, she texted him. How was it? He typed, You looked like yourself. A long pause. Then, that might be the best review I've gotten. Yes, he asked her to marry him on a Sunday morning in October. Not with planning, not with a reservation, or a setting he'd arranged. They were in his kitchen, the one with the cabinet that didn't quite close and the table that was slightly too big for two people. Lily was at Sandra's. The coffee was done, and the morning was gray and quiet outside the window. They'd been talking about nothing in particular. Something about a show they'd both been half watching, something about a problem with one of her company's supplier contracts that she was going to have to deal with on Monday. The ordinary accumulation of a life lived alongside another person. And he looked at her across the kitchen table with her coffee and her phone and her hair slightly undone from the night, and he thought, this is the shape. This has been the shape for a while. And at some point you stop waiting to be sure you're sure, and you just say the thing. I want to marry you, he said. She looked up from her phone. I'm not asking it as a question, he said. I'm just telling you what I want. You can take your time with it. She put the phone down. She looked at him with the full weight of her attention, and he could see her not managing, not calculating, not assessing, just receiving the thing he'd said and letting it sit in her. I'm not going to take my time with it, she said. Okay. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. Obviously? I drove 40 miles to a small shop to ask a stranger to help me because I thought there was something about him worth trusting, she said. And I was right. And I've been right about very few personal things in my life, so when I'm right, I try to stay right. She looked at him steadily. Obviously, yes. He almost said something else. He didn't, because the moment was what it was and didn't need anything added to it. He got up from his side of the table and came around to her side, and she reached up and took his hand, and they stayed like that in the kitchen for a while. The October morning gray outside, the coffee going cold, The cabinet above the stove door slightly opened the way it always was. Lily's response, when they told her, was a silence of approximately 4 seconds, followed by, "Does this mean Sophia gets the other side of the table?" "The table's staying as it is," Ethan said. Lily looked at Sophia. "He never buys the good cereal anymore," she said. "If you're going to be here, can you buy the good cereal?" "What's the good cereal?" Sophia said. Lily told her. "Done," Sophia said. Lily assessed this concession and apparently found it satisfactory, because she went back to what she was doing, and that was essentially all the formal acceptance they got from a 7-year-old who had been quietly conducting her assessment of Sophia for 6 months and had, somewhere along the way, arrived at her conclusion and simply not announced it. They married in April, on a Saturday, in the backyard of Ethan's house on a day that was cold in the morning and then warmed as the afternoon came on, the way April mornings sometimes will. It was small. Sandra, who cried from the 3rd minute and made no apologies for it. Marcus, who wore an actual tie and stood with the particular dignity of a man doing honor to something. Will Bennett, who had become something resembling a friend in the intervening months. Patricia Ashe, who wore the same blazer as always and said nothing excessive and stayed until the end. Richard Bennett, who came in a car with his care team and sat in the afternoon sun and watched his daughter and said almost nothing, and looked for the first time in a long time like a man at rest. Lily wore a dress she'd chosen herself, in the color she'd insisted on, and stood next to Sophia during the ceremony with the composed gravity of a child who understands that something real is happening and wants to be part of it properly. Nobody gave a long speech. Nobody needed to. Ethan said his part looking at Sophia, who looked back at him with the expression he'd first seen in the corner of a sitting room at 2 a.m. The one that wasn't managed, wasn't strategic, was just a woman without her armor on, present and real. And finally, not alone. Sophia said her part in the clear, direct voice she used when she was not performing anything. Lily, beside her, nodded along at 2 separate points, apparently endorsing the sentiments. Afterward, in the backyard, with the afternoon sun low through the tree line and the sound of people talking and the smell of the food Sandra had spent 2 days making, Ethan stood at the edge of the yard for a moment with his coffee. There was always coffee. And looked at the people in his life in one place. He thought about the morning he'd slid out from under the Silverado and seen Lily standing at the edge of the bay in her school clothes, patient, waiting. About the morning Sophia had rolled into the lot in the black Mercedes and asked for him by name. About Martin at the head of a candlelit table. About Patricia's voice on the terrace. About Richard talking about the quality of light on a lake in Ontario. He thought about all the ways a life changes while it's still looking like it's staying the same. You're under a truck one morning, and by the end of the week, everything is different. Not because a single thing was fixed, but because a door opened at an angle you weren't expecting, and you made a choice to walk through it, and then another choice, and then another. The way it actually works, one next step at a time. None of them certain, all of them yours. Sophia came alongside him. She didn't say anything immediately. They stood at the edge of the yard in the April afternoon, watching Lily explain something at considerable volume to Marcus, watching Richard talk to Will in the quiet way of 2 people who have found a wavelength, watching Patricia Ashe eat Sandra's food with the focused appreciation of someone who recognizes quality work. "You're thinking," Sophia said. "Little bit." "About what?" He thought about how to say it. "About the compressor," he said. She looked at him. "It was leaking for 3 weeks before I fixed it," he said. "I kept meaning to get to it and I kept having other things. And then Marcus spent 20 minutes on it one Sunday, and it was just done. Just like that. And I thought I walked past that thing every morning for 3 weeks." She was quiet. "I think about that sometimes," he said. "How many things in your life are the leaking compressor? Things that seem like they're too much to deal with, or the wrong time, or there's always something else. And it turns out the fix was smaller than the not fixing." She considered this. "Is this a metaphor for us?" "I think the metaphor for us is that you drove 40 miles to a small shop and made me an offer that sounded completely insane. It was a reasonable offer. You offered a stranger $45,000 to attend a family dinner. It was a weekend, not just a dinner, and it worked." He looked at her. She looked back. The afternoon light was in her eyes, and she was his wife, and the yard was full of people who had found their way here from different directions, and the cabinet in the kitchen still didn't close properly, And Lily was still telling Marcus something that required several hand gestures, and none of it was perfect, and all of it was exactly right. "Yeah," he said. "It worked." She reached over and took his hand. The April afternoon went on around them, imperfect, warm, full of the ordinary and irreplaceable noise of people who belonged to each other, and they stood in it together, which was, in the end, the whole point. Some things you can plan for. Most things, you can't. You make the best choice available with the information you have, you take the next step, and you find out where it leads. The people who show up for you aren't always the people you expected. The help you need sometimes walks through a door you didn't know was there, in a form you wouldn't have thought to ask for. What Ethan Cole learned, slowly, imperfectly, across a year he never could have anticipated, is that strength isn't the absence of need. It's the willingness to ask, to receive, to stand beside someone in a room when it costs you something, and to stay. What Sophia Bennett learned is that the control she'd spent 20 years building was never the safety she thought it was. Safety turned out to look like a man with grease under his nails sitting across from her at a kitchen table that was too big for two people. Safety looked like a 7-year-old who asked hard questions and meant them. It looked like choosing to be known. The company survived. The legal proceedings resolved in the way legal proceedings do, messily, over time, with outcomes that satisfied no one completely and everyone adequately. Martin Bennett retired from public company life. He and Sophia never repaired what had broken, but they found, eventually, something that worked at a distance, civil, careful, aware of what it was and what it wasn't. It was enough. Richard Bennett went fishing twice that year, at the reservoir outside Millerton, with his daughter and her husband and a 7-year-old who turned out to have better casting instincts than either of her parents. He said the light on the water was exactly as he remembered.